Welcome to another wild ride in the world of human ingenuity and alien absurdity. I never thought sharing an apartment with an extraterrestrial would involve me tiptoeing around pheromones stronger than any chemical spill I've read about in science journals. It all started innocently enough. The ad in the interspecies housing forum had promised friendly, clean, and minimally smelly roommates. I had assumed it was a joke. When Zara showed up at my door, tall, luminescent skin that shimmered in shades of blue, and eyes that seemed to pierce into multiple dimensions at once, I figured maybe the friendly part was still on the table. The first week was surprisingly manageable. Zara cooked things that smelled vaguely like neon carrots and sang melodies that rattled the air in unusual but oddly soothing harmonics. It felt like living with a roommate from a sci-fi dreamscape. Then, without warning, the change began. At first, it was subtle. Zara's color deepened to a brighter, more intense cerulean. She started pacing, whispering to herself in clicks and tones that I couldn't understand, and leaving strange, glowing residues on the floor. I thought maybe she was stressed. But then came the unmistakable signs, the scent. My apartment, which I had always prided on as a neutral-smelling, breathable habitat, was suddenly overtaken by a perfume so potent it made my nostrils flare. It was sweet, sharp, almost electric, and there was no ignoring it. "Zara," I said cautiously, trying to sound casual. "Are you okay?" She turned to me, pupils dilating dramatically, and let out a sound that made my stomach flip. I suddenly understood. She was in heat. And there was no manual for handling an alien in full mating frenzy. Panic surged. I tried Googling anything remotely useful, but most alien heat management guides were laughably vague or ended in warnings that read like obituaries. There was nothing for first-time human cohabitants. My brain raced. How do you keep an alien roommate from turning your apartment into a pheromonal war zone without getting involved? Zara didn't seem concerned about my presence. She moved closer, her skin radiating warmth that made the air shimmer, and I felt my heart hammering in response. Not entirely rational, considering we were two species apart. I remembered a tip from one obscure forum. When in doubt, maintain extreme boundaries. I tried, I really did, but Zara had a knack for testing boundaries. Every time I moved away, she mirrored my motion, a graceful, sinuous dance of pursuit and provocation. It was mesmerizing, terrifying, and completely inappropriate for a human-alien living situation. The first night was a blur. I barricaded myself in the bedroom, stuffed my nose with a towel, and contemplated life choices. Why did I agree to rent with an alien? What did my parents mean by living with roommates builds character? This was beyond character building, this was survival. Zara's pacing outside my door sounded like a rhythmic drum, each step making the floor vibrate with an intensity one didn't think possible. I imagined if aliens had a concept of punishment, I was probably on the menu. By morning, I had formulated a plan, distraction. If I could redirect Zara's attention away from me, maybe, just maybe, I could survive the heat cycle without incident. I dug through my old supplies, hollow projectors, audio emitters, and a variety of gadgets I barely understood. I activated a hollow projection of a simulated alien meadow. Zara's species thrived in open, communal spaces. The moment the projection flickered on, her eyes lit up with an almost feral joy. She abandoned my doorway instantly and bounded toward the simulation, leaving me in a sweat-soaked, shaky silence. Relief washed over me, but I knew this was temporary. Heat cycles weren't something you could postpone with a few distractions. The real challenge was enduring the days to come. Each hour was a calculated balance of avoidance, patience, and careful observation. Zara's behavior was unpredictable. Sometimes she would lounge in the kitchen, humming songs that made my teeth vibrate, and other times she would dart around like a predator chasing invisible prey. I took careful notes, creating an emergency schedule of human-alien cohabitation survival. Meals were tricky. I couldn't cook anything aromatic without risking attracting her attention, which meant my diet became a sad mix of bland protein packets and nutrient gels. Social interaction outside the apartment was out of the question. I couldn't risk exposure to anyone else and risk triggering Zara's heightened senses. Sleep became a fantasy. The pheromonal influence made even simple rest difficult. I resorted to sound-canceling headphones and a helmet of sorts fashioned from old insulation panels. My apartment felt less like home and more like a controlled laboratory of chaos. By day 3, I realized the heat cycle had a psychological effect on me. I was jittery, jumpy, and constantly aware of Zara's presence even when she was invisible. It was like living in a state of heightened alert, every scent, shadow, and vibration amplified. But amidst the terror, there was awe. Zara's biology was extraordinary. She moved with a fluidity that seemed to bend physics, her skin changing hues with her emotions, and her pheromones weren't just scent, they were a form of communication, an unspoken language I could only partially decode. The more I observed, the more I understood that surviving this cycle wasn't just about evasion. It was about learning, adapting, and respecting a life form utterly alien to me. By the end of the first week, a strange rhythm emerged. Zara's movements became slightly more predictable, her needs slightly easier to interpret. I had developed a set of coping strategies: distraction projections, isolation periods, and careful scent masking. I began to see our situation not just as chaos, but as an experiment in interspecies coexistence. It was exhausting, frustrating, and bizarrely educational. And just as I started to feel a flicker of confidence, I realized something terrifying. This was only the beginning. Heat cycles could last days, maybe weeks. I was in it for the long haul. I wasn't just surviving. I was learning to live alongside a creature whose very existence challenged my understanding of biology, social norms, and personal space. This was human resilience tested against alien unpredictability, and somehow, I felt ready. Or as ready as any human could be, knowing that every second in this apartment was a gamble. Little did I know, the next phase of Zara's heat cycle would push me beyond mere survival, forcing me into scenarios that no manual, or forum post, could ever prepare me for. The morning after the first week felt like stepping into a pressure cooker. Zara had discovered that the hollow metal projection could be manipulated, and now she spent hours rearranging the landscape, her eyes glowing with delight. Every adjustment sent vibrations through the apartment floor, making me feel as though I were standing on shifting tectonic plates. I tried to maintain a low profile, blending into the background like some hyper-aware wall ornament, but even that proved difficult. Zara's senses were extraordinary. She could detect the faintest changes in air composition, subtle shifts in temperature, and even minor emotional fluctuations. I realized quickly that no lie, no attempt to conceal my panic, would go unnoticed. On top of that, her movements had become more assertive, almost territorial. She claimed the kitchen as her nesting area, leaving sticky, glowing residue along every surface. Eating became a high-risk operation. I had to prepare my meals silently, with careful attention to avoiding scents that might trigger her heightened instincts. One slip could mean a full-scale pursuit, and I had learned from the previous week that escape was no simple feat. Every object in the apartment now seemed to exist solely in the context of Zara's cycle. Chairs, tables, even the curtains had become part of her navigational territory. I mapped out safe zones, marking areas where I could sit or sleep without risking detection. This made my living space a labyrinth of psychological stress, but it was necessary. The real challenge, however, came in the form of communication. Zara's heat cycle altered the way she expressed herself. Her clicks and hums became faster, more urgent, almost like a language running on a frequency my human brain couldn't fully interpret. Misreading her signals could escalate minor interactions into chaotic confrontations. I had to learn to anticipate her moods through subtle cues, the way her skin shifted color, the slight twitch of a tendril-like appendage, the rhythm of her hums. Every observation was critical. I began to keep a journal, recording details minute by minute, attempting to identify patterns that could guide my responses. Even so, nothing truly prepared me for the day she discovered my hiding spot behind the sofa. She approached silently at first, her glowing skin dimming in curiosity. I froze, convinced that any sudden movement would provoke her. Instead, she tilted her head, producing a soft, melodic hum. It wasn't threatening, it was inquisitive. This was the first sign that the heat cycle, while chaotic, had a predictable rhythm if observed carefully. From that point, our interactions evolved. I learned when to retreat, when to offer neutral gestures, and when it was safe to exist in her presence without being noticed. My life became a delicate balance of observation and strategic movement. It was exhausting, yet oddly exhilarating. I was living in a constant state of hyper-awareness, each day a new puzzle to solve. At times, I wondered if surviving this cycle would alter me permanently. My senses had sharpened, my instincts were on high alert. I could detect faint changes in temperature and subtle shifts in ambient energy that I would have ignored before. It was as if living with Zara had rewired my perception, forcing me to experience the world through a lens both alien and intensely human. And then came the unexpected lesson in patience. Heat cycles weren't a continuous barrage of chaos. There were moments of calm, almost gentle intervals where Zara's behavior softened. During these windows, I learned to observe her in ways that weren't survival-driven. I noticed the grace in her movements, the fluidity of her skin's color shifts, and the musicality in her hums. There was beauty in the biology, and it forced me to confront my own preconceptions. Aliens weren't monsters or mere curiosities. They were complex beings, capable of thought, emotion, and behaviors that could challenge and inspire a human mind. Yet, the relief was fleeting. Every calm period was inevitably followed by another surge in the cycle, each stronger and more intense than the last. I adapted my daily routines accordingly. Sleep cycles became segmented, meals were planned around predicted activity spikes, and social interaction outside the apartment was almost non-existent. I even developed a system of warning signals using light flashes and vibrations, subtly communicating my location and intentions to Zara without provoking her instincts. There were moments when the absurdity of it all hit me. I would sit in the corner of the living room, watching Zara perform some intricate ritual of pacing and hums, and laugh at the sheer chaos of my existence. This wasn't just survival anymore, it was an education in interspecies empathy, strategy, and endurance. But nothing could prepare me for the breakthrough moment, when Zara actually responded to me on her terms. After 2 weeks of careful observation, I tried a new approach. I mimicked her hums. Tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, I produced the same tonal pattern she emitted. The effect was immediate. She froze, regarded me with what I could only interpret as cautious curiosity, and then produced a sequence that I recognized as acknowledgement. For the first time, it felt like communication was possible. This wasn't just mimicry, it was connection. My heart raced as I realized that surviving the heat cycle wasn't just about avoidance. It was about engagement, understanding, and mutual recognition. From that day, our dynamic shifted subtly. She allowed me closer, and I began to assist in ways that weren't strictly self-preservational. I helped with environmental adjustments, ensured her needs were met without endangering myself, and even started anticipating her actions. Living with Zara was still unpredictable, still challenging, but now it had an element of partnership, however tenuous. The apartment transformed from a battlefield to a shared space of cautious coexistence. Every day was still a gamble, but I had begun to see patterns, rhythms, and even moments of humor in the chaos. And yet I knew the heat cycle had peaks yet to come, moments that would test not just my endurance but my ingenuity, empathy, and ability to navigate the boundaries between human and alien instincts. Survival was no longer enough. I had to thrive, adapt, and learn faster than ever before. The following days brought a new level of intensity. Zara's heat cycle seemed to peak unpredictably, each surge more pronounced than the last. I had grown accustomed to the hums, the color shifts, and the subtle pheromonal cues, but nothing could fully prepare me for the sheer force of her biology at its height. She moved through the apartment with a hypnotic energy, her eyes glowing like twin stars, her every step resonating in the floorboards. Even in moments of apparent calm, I felt the undercurrent of her instincts, the invisible pull of her cycle influencing the very atmosphere. I realized I had become hyper-aware not just of her, but of myself. Every breath, every motion, every sound I made carried consequences. My strategies evolved into a complex system of prediction and evasion. I tracked the time between her pacing, the intervals of her melodic hums, and the subtle fluctuations in air quality caused by her pheromones. It was meticulous work, and yet it became almost addictive. Survival had transformed into a science, a study of alien behavior and human adaptability. I found myself anticipating her movements before she made them, responding with gestures, sounds, and even micro-movements that kept me just outside the reach of chaos. But the challenge wasn't purely logistical. Living in such close proximity to a being so biologically potent began to blur the lines of perception. My mind, constantly interpreting cues from Zara, started to adapt in strange ways. I noticed my own instincts sharpening, my awareness of pheromones, tonal variations, and micro-expressions heightened beyond what I thought possible. It was as if the alien energy was teaching me a new form of perception, forcing me to experience the world in ways humans rarely could. Still, there were moments of sheer terror. One evening, Zara discovered the emergency scent masks I had set up in the bedroom. She approached silently, her skin shifting through a spectrum of blues and purples, and I held my breath, expecting an immediate confrontation. Instead, she paused, her pupils narrowing, and emitted a complex series of clicks and hums. It took me a moment, but I realized she was testing me, gauging my reactions. My survival instincts kicked in, and I responded with calm, measured tones, mimicking her cadence. The response was immediate. She shifted away, almost imperceptibly, acknowledging my attempt at communication. That night, I slept in short intervals, still hyper-aware but emboldened by the realization that Zara was capable of understanding boundaries, even in the throes of her heat cycle. The partnership, tentative though it was, began to take shape. Meals became slightly easier, as I had learned to prepare neutral-scented nutrient packs that wouldn't provoke her instincts. I even experimented with subtle environmental changes, shifting light levels, introducing gentle vibrations that seemed to calm her during peaks of the cycle. Each successful experiment boosted my confidence, though the stakes remained high. A single misstep could unravel the delicate balance we had achieved. It was a lesson in patience, observation, and the power of adaptive thinking. As the days stretched on, I noticed subtle shifts in Zara's behavior beyond the immediate effects of her heat cycle. She began to linger near me during the calm periods, watching, humming, and sometimes mimicking simple movements. It was as if she was curious, learning from me as I had been learning from her. I found myself studying her in return, noticing nuances I had overlooked before, the way her skin reflected light, the subtle harmonics in her hums, and even the rhythm of her breathing. In those moments, the chaos faded into something almost serene. Living with an alien in heat was still far from comfortable, but there were glimpses of understanding and mutual recognition. Of course, calm was always temporary. Peaks would return, sudden and overwhelming, testing every boundary I had learned to establish. One particularly intense night, the apartment vibrated with the resonance of Zara's movements. I crouched in a corner, listening to the hums that now sounded like a symphony of alien biology. Every flicker of light, every shift in air pressure, and every subtle change in scent demanded immediate reaction. I moved like a shadow, matching her rhythm, predicting her path, and surviving purely through anticipation and careful observation. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. And yet, through the intensity, a strange camaraderie emerged. We were learning to coexist, each understanding the other's limits, each negotiating space and energy in a silent, instinctive dialogue. Even amidst chaos, there was a growing respect, a recognition that survival required more than avoidance. It required empathy, adaptation, and sometimes, sheer ingenuity. In quieter moments, I reflected on the absurdity of my situation. Only a human, living in a society obsessed with alien novelty, could end up navigating phenomenal warfare in their own apartment. I laughed quietly, realizing that this experience was rewriting my understanding of resilience. I had become a strategist, a biologist, and an interpreter all at once, learning a language without words, perceiving cues invisible to anyone else. By the end of the third week, patterns had stabilized enough that I could predict not only her peaks but also her needs and preferences during calm intervals. I had developed a system for arranging the apartment, planning meals, and scheduling my movements to minimize conflict. The apartment had become a living laboratory of interspecies coexistence, and I, surprisingly, had become proficient in the alien rhythms of life. Yet, as I observed Zara one evening, humming softly while her skin shimmered in gentle hues, I realized that survival was only part of the story. There was growth here, in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was learning patience, observation, and empathy on a level I hadn't known existed. I was living proof that humans could adapt to the most unexpected challenges, thriving not through brute force but through intellect, intuition, and respect for the alien world around us. And as the heat cycle continued its unpredictable cadence, I understood that the lessons wouldn't end when it was over. The knowledge, the skills, and the insights I was gaining would linger, shaping me in ways far beyond this chaotic apartment. It was, in a strange way, exhilarating, a testament to human adaptability, resilience, and the endless capacity to find order, humor, and meaning even in the most absurd and alien circumstances. The final stretch of Zara's heat cycle brought challenges unlike anything I had faced before. Even after weeks of observation, adaptation, and careful planning, the intensity escalated to a level that tested every skill I had honed. Her movements became more unpredictable, her pheromones richer and more potent, and the apartment itself seemed to pulse with her presence. I had to rely on every instinct I had sharpened, every system I had developed, and every ounce of courage I could muster. The night began with a subtle shift in the air. The usual hums became faster, layered, almost orchestrated, and the colors of her skin rippled in vibrant patterns I hadn't seen before. I felt a surge of panic and exhilaration simultaneously. This was the culmination of the cycle, the peak phase where everything I had learned would be put to the ultimate test. I moved through the apartment cautiously, avoiding areas I knew would trigger her heightened awareness. I used every distraction device I had improvised, hollow projectors, subtle vibrations, light adjustments, to maintain a fragile equilibrium. Every step was calculated, every breath monitored. Zara's awareness was absolute. Even the slightest lapse could lead to an overwhelming confrontation. Yet amidst the chaos, I felt a strange rhythm emerge. After weeks of hypervigilance, I had begun to sense patterns, intuitively understanding when to move, when to pause, and when to communicate nonverbally. It was almost like a dance, a complex interplay of biology, perception, and instinct. I marveled at the precision required, realizing that surviving the cycle wasn't merely about avoidance. It was about connection, understanding, and respect. As the hours stretched on, I noticed that Zara's behavior began to show subtle signs of fatigue. Her movements slowed just enough to create brief windows of calm, and her hums softened into patterns I could mimic with increasing accuracy. I seized these moments to carefully approach her, mimicking her tonal rhythms, adjusting my position to show non-threatening intent. The response was immediate. She paused, regarded me with luminous eyes, and tilted her head in what I interpreted as acknowledgement. Communication, tenuous and instinctive, was finally occurring. These small victories reinforced the idea that survival depended not on distance, but on engagement. I learned to anticipate her needs, to provide subtle environmental adjustments, and to signal my presence without triggering instinctual reactions. Over the next few days, a fragile partnership developed. Zara allowed me closer during the calmer intervals, and I began to assist her in ways that minimized disruption while maintaining my own safety. Our interactions, once dominated by chaos and avoidance, became a dialogue of gestures, hums, and color shifts. There was a sense of mutual recognition emerging, a silent acknowledgement of our coexistence despite the overwhelming biological forces at play. And yet, the heat cycle had one final trial. A sudden surge caught me off guard. Zara moved with unprecedented speed, her pheromones saturating the apartment. I had only moments to respond, relying entirely on instinct and the patterns I had painstakingly observed. I mirrored her movements, adjusted my tone, and shifted my position precisely, maintaining just enough distance to avoid triggering an aggressive response. The intensity was staggering, a reminder of how alien her biology truly was and how extraordinary human adaptability could be when tested to the limit. When the surge finally subsided, I slumped against the wall, exhausted but elated. I had survived the peak phase, maintained a tenuous connection, and navigated the most extreme behavior I could imagine. Zara, too, seemed to relax, her skin dimming to soft shades of blue, her hums slowing into gentle rhythms. It was a moment of calm that felt almost sacred after the relentless intensity of the past weeks. In the following days, as the heat cycle continued its decline toward resolution, our coexistence stabilized. I had learned to read her subtle cues, anticipate her movements, and respond appropriately, creating a system of living that allowed both of us to function. The apartment transformed from a chaotic battlefield into a space of cautious harmony, where survival, observation, and mutual respect coexisted. Reflecting on the experience, I realized that the heat cycle had taught me far more than I could have anticipated. I had developed a heightened awareness, sharpened instincts, and an appreciation for the complexity of alien biology and behavior. More importantly, I had discovered the human capacity for adaptability, empathy, and learning under extreme circumstances. Even amidst chaos and unpredictability, humans could find ways to connect, survive, and thrive. By the end of the cycle, Zara's behavior normalized. She no longer moved with the frantic intensity that had defined the peak, and her pheromones returned to baseline levels. The apartment felt breathable again, the air lighter, and my own senses gradually settled back into a human rhythm. Yet the lessons lingered. I had grown in ways subtle and profound, my perception of the world forever altered by the intensity of interspecies coexistence. Looking at Zara, I realized that our time together had become a study in resilience, adaptability, and communication beyond language. I had survived the most intense alien heat cycle imaginable, not through force or avoidance alone, but through observation, understanding, and careful engagement. It was a testament to human ingenuity and the endless potential to thrive in circumstances that seemed insurmountable. In the calm that followed, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The apartment, once a zone of chaos, now felt like a living experiment, a testament to the delicate balance between species, instincts, and intellect. I had navigated the impossible, learned to coexist with a being utterly different from myself, and emerged with not just survival, but understanding and respect. And though the heat cycle was over, the experience left an indelible mark. I knew that any future challenges, alien or otherwise, would be met with the lessons learned here: patience, observation, empathy, and the unwavering belief in human adaptability. Living with Zara had been chaotic, exhausting, and terrifying, but it had also been enlightening, proving that even in the face of overwhelming alien biology, humanity could not just endure, but find connection, humor, and resilience. And as I watched her settle into a calm rhythm, I couldn't help but smile, knowing that we had survived the cycle together, strangers turned companions through chaos, biology, and the sheer will to adapt.